Hi guys, welcome back. Today I have some teaching tips for you. So as well as giving resources for dancers, we also want to be giving tips for teachers, things that we've done that have worked, or maybe pointing out things that we've done that haven't really worked, or just sparking inspiration for saying things in a new way. So I find a lot of dancers, if I say something to one dancer a certain way, they will get it, it will click, and they really understand and can apply the correction. That same kind of language might not work for a different dancer. They might not understand. So this is simply just some ideas for some types of language that I've used to teach sheddings that kind of works. Now, to preface this, this is more for intermediate premier dancers, because when kids are little and they're first learning a shedding, they do really need that side, back, front, back cue, because they don't physically know what they are doing yet. In my experience, I have heard going into premier level classes, teachers still saying side, back, front, back. So to me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that by the time you get to that high level, that we're using the same verbal cues as we would use for a person that's a beginner that's first learning. So today I'm just going to talk about a couple ideas for different verbal cues that you can use for shedding movements that might work better than if you're right now just saying side, back, front, back. So the first thing that I like to talk about with my dancers when it comes to shedding is, instead of saying side, I will say reach or stretch, right? For dancers that have issues with lengthening their leg, they're not fully stretching their leg to their full capacity in second, I will say reach or stretch. For dancers that have heavier seconds, or plunky seconds that I like to call them, where they hit that second and their foot and ankle collapse, I usually say tip. So I'll say tip and then go on to the rest of the shedding. So those are the two kind of verbal cues that for me work for those two different types of students. So next we have the snapping up and doing the round the leg movement. So something that I notice, often you'll see dancers, they hit that first third rear aerial and it's really solid. Then as the leg comes around, it's a little bit loose. Sometimes you see the claw foot come out and around. It stays in that shape, but it's not actually in contact with the leg. It goes a little bit like a claw that's floating around. So what I've started saying to a lot of my students is either that reach or that tip for the second. Then I say tight, tighter, and tightest. Often that last third rear aerial, especially if you're going into a turn or into any spring really, any transition into another movement, that last third rear aerial gets lost. So they maybe hit the first one really solid, they might get a tight round the leg here, but then they're already thinking about what their other leg is about to be doing. So they just kind of throw away that last third rear aerial. And sometimes the thigh will roll in, or the foot will not make it all the way around to the back and you'll get this little side situation happening. So for a shedding, my verbal cue for most of my students is either reach, tight, tighter, tightest, or tip, tight, tighter, tightest. So that's the first thing that I like to do with sheddings. Second thing, oh, we have a visitor. Hello, Bella. Little cat cameo there. So next thing that I notice a lot with shedding, specifically the transition of sheddings, when you're springing onto the other foot. Either you travel to the side or you're lacking elevation. Because when your foot is in the third rear aerial, you don't necessarily have to hop to get your leg down. So something that I like to say when they're finishing their shedding, reach, tight, tighter, tightest, hop, don't drop. So when I say hop, don't drop, it really encourages them to push off of this leg so they actually do, in fact, give me an elevation. So hop, don't drop is something I use for any movement, really. It's not just sheddings, any movement that you're springing from one foot to the other. This is really common in back steps, especially because that working leg in back steps is going down the back. They're thinking so much about sliding it down the back that they forget this leg has to also be elevating. A lot of the times they'll just kind of replace on a back step. So saying hop, don't drop really solidifies that for my students and gets them to actually elevate every time they're doing a spring. The other thing that I notice in my students, and I am also guilty of this when I'm dancing it, is the spring out to the side. Now, it's often very slight, and it's often an attempt to get more turnout on that supporting side. I know for me, it's always trying to push that knee back, and I get carried away, and I end up springing towards the side. So for that, you can apply the hop, don't drop, but also I think about crossing my toes slightly behind, which is not correct, but when I put it into practice in the dance, it makes it so that foot goes straight down rather than taking that pathway that's going around. So if you have students that are tipping when they're springing, maybe try having them think about just a little cross. That might have been a little bit too exaggerated, but you get the idea. Oftentimes, if they've developed that habit, telling them to cross will simply make them go straight underneath of themselves. So those are my major tips for sheddings. Trying new verbal cues like reach, tight, tighter, tightest, or talking about the spring differently, hop, don't drop, or telling them to cross their supporting foot underneath. It's almost like they're going through, if there was such thing as a third cross rear position, that's kind of what I try and have them think about. So hopefully this video was helpful. If these verbal cues don't work for your dancer, maybe they will inspire you to think of a new verbal cue that will work for your dancer. So I hope this video was helpful for everyone, and I will see you next time.